Hi everyone, Harry here. Still on the road, but neither rain nor snow nor sleet, all three of which we had in this quick crisscross of the country for college visits yesterday, nor dark of night, which we also had, will stay this YouTube from its appointed rounds. So here to talk about first the really important, emphatic, if expected, ruling in the case brought by the Associated Press in response to the nasty, brutal, and really stupid move by the administration to keep them from their normal traditional access to the Oval Office and Air Force One and other places because, you may remember this, so much has happened since, their grave sin of not jumping to the president's decision to change the 400-year-old name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. They continue to say Gulf of America, and Associated Press actually is influential in these kinds of considerations. They have a style book that a lot of papers will just naturally employ. Anyway, they just did the administration keep them from their normal access and in a really nasty, high-handed way. And they barely pretended that it was other than for the reason that they weren't saying Gulf of America, and the evidence was overwhelming. And that's really, and I said this at the time, no matter who got it, this was going to go down, and it did. But it's really such a fundamental principle that the government may not instruct press or any of us how we have to call things, whether we have to salute the flag, all things like that. This is compelled speech based on viewpoint, and so it's about the highest level of scrutiny, and their reasons just were completely wanting. Now, the case went to a Trump appointee from the first administration, Trump 1.0, Trevor McFaden, who sits on the same bench that Judge Boasberg, and I think that's significant. I underscore it regularly because that's the bunch of judges who spent several years trying all these January 6 cases, seeing with their up close what kind of people had tried to prevent the peaceful transfer of power, calling them as they were, and then being aghast when Trump on the first day in office wiped out all that work in one fell swoop. So he was that person. I think there's a kind of solidarity on that bench. In addition, he is a guy with who had served at the Department of Justice, to be sure, under Trump 1.0, but even so, the culture was then intact. The rule of law was, and all the norms were intact, and he's someone who's got to understand this. What is happening now is both tragic and based on lies. So, Trump judge, but Trump judge with DOJ experience from the D.C. District Court. And he was really emphatic, and for sure, and he saw this, he went to town on it and took a long time with kind of meticulous descriptions of the history of the First Amendment. And this was one I think he needs to frame and have in his volume of most important and memorable opinions, and it's very strong. And but it goes through basic First Amendment principles, then goes through, just to be sure, the most recent opinions of the Supreme Court in case there could be gradations or whatever, so really stitches things up, and I think it will hold. And then when he turns to the government's arguments filed by one Ed Martin Jr., more to come about him, but he is the really disgraceful figure who's been put forward by the administration to run the biggest office, a U.S. Attorney's office in the country. It's just the administration's arguments seemed worse than silly, both silly legally, but also just nasty, totalitarian. Are you kidding? You're keeping the AP out because they won't say Gulf of America. What crazy third world republic do you come from? Now, the trying to make the best of a bad hand, what the administration had tried to say, access to date had always been decided sort of neutrally, more or less, by the White House correspondents. And as they've done with everything else, the administration grabbed it to themselves. And their pitch to Judge McFaden was, you know, AP doesn't have any special rights. They're asking for special rights. They've had them in the past, but we want to diversify, give to new news sources like One News America or whatever that hyper-conservative outlet is called. And you know, we get to decide now that we're taking that prerogative, and AP has no special rights. And McFadden's very careful here to say, sure, that's true. You can't, it's not as if, you know, every single time there's a lottery, AP has to win it or they have special rights. But they have, I won't even say equal rights, they have the right not to be excluded based on viewpoint discrimination. So to the extent you're doing this, they can't be in second place or even slightly behind the rest of the pack because you don't like that they won't say Gulf of America rather than Gulf of Mexico. So he marches through things. I mean, it remains to the administration to maybe try to punish them with other people or put them in some kind of circulation. They don't have to put them, it's always been the case for the AP that they were way up there with just a couple outlets like the New York Times, and McFaden says the Constitution doesn't require that, but it does require that you not discriminate on the basis of their viewpoint, and he marches through things, and it's a very clear, careful, and stitched up opinion that I think if the administration appeals to the D.C. Circuit, even the Supreme Court, will hold. And it's just, you know, I expected at the time, it's so flagrantly unconstitutional, but it's, again, the courts are basically holding the line. It's a really welcome repudiation of such a basic principle that no administration, you know, before that in our memory anyway would have been so sort of blunt and kind of low class to try to do out of this, you know, basic reprisal for not saying the maximum leader's preferred locution for the Gulf of Mexico. So a good day in that sense, a solid day, an opinion by a Trump appointee that I think will hold up and that reestablishes a very fundamental principle that were it to have gone the other way, or if by chance it does on appeal, which I do not expect, would have been really unsettling. But the right principle, reestablished, government may not punish people based on their viewpoint, and they did it flagrantly. End of story. We'll see if the government appeals, but I don't see they're making any headway. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.